What's up everybody, Greg here with Lensprotogo and Lens Rentals, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the DJI Action and comparing it against the GoPro Hero 7. Now the GoPro is an older camera, which means the GoPro Hero 8 is probably on the horizon very soon, and the DJI Action is a new camera coming out from DJI and the first of their Action line. Today I'm going to be putting these two cameras through a bunch of tests to really see how they stack up against each other. The first thing we're going to look at is the audio to see which one has better internal audio. We're going to look at the color, looking at skin tones and some other random footage. We're going to look at the auto exposure performance to see how smooth the transitions are from darker to lighter areas. We'll look at low light performance, really pushing the ISOs of both of these cameras. We're going to look at some stabilization, the rock steady with the DJI versus the hyper smooth of the Hero 7, as well as just some more 4K footage, really looking at what both of these cameras can do. If you want to jump ahead to any of these tests, they're all going to be time coded in the description, so if there's something specific you want to look at, you can jump ahead to that section. After I go out and shoot a bunch of test footage, sort of vlog style with both of these cameras, I'm going to talk about some of the features of these cameras, the touchscreens, the menu layout, and my thoughts on both of them. And then I'll go back through some of the tests that I ran and talk through each of them and sort of which camera I think performed better in each of the tests. So let's get outside and start shooting. All right, so we're going to start this off by looking at two things. The first one is going to be the audio levels, and you can kind of just keep an eye on this throughout the entire thing, but this is really a good audio test for both of these cameras. Now I'm holding it about an arm's length away, sort of in a vlog style, and this is the GoPro Hero 7, and I'm going to switch over to the Osmo Action. I am walking on some rocks, so you might hear that in the background, but this should be a pretty good idea of what these audio levels are going to sound like, and I'm not talking too loud. The second thing that we want to look at is the color. Both of these cameras are set in auto white balance, so really pay attention to the skin tones and how it reacts to different colors around me to make them as natural as possible. Both of them are in their normal standard color. There's no Cine-like or GoPro flat color. So just keep those two things in mind as we go throughout the rest of these tests. Now I'm about to go inside the garage, which is a pretty dark area. As you can see, it's bright out right now and overexposed, and we're getting some really nice light into these cameras, but I want to see how well they actually transition from this brighter environment into a dark area. So I'm going to spin the camera around. And as you can see, both of them do a pretty good job pretty quickly adjusting for that darker area and bumping up the ISOs. You can also see some dynamic range here, which isn't too great. We're getting quite a bit of blown out area with the garage door, as well as some really dark shadows over here. And the ISO limit on both of these right now is 3200. So I'm gonna pull out this four-wheeler to test the rock steady riding in the woods out behind the house. But before we do that, I wanna test out the ISO performance. So while we're in this garage, I'm gonna go through all of the ISOs from 100 all the way up to 3200 and even 6400 on the GoPro just to see how it handles. So I'm gonna set this up while I pull that out, and we'll start doing the tests. Alright, so I've had some time to play around with both of these cameras and the footage, which is what you just watched. Now I want to go through some of those tests and let you know what my thoughts are and sort of which one wins in each of those comparisons. So starting off with the first test that we ran, which was the audio. Now I definitely think the GoPro has an edge here. It has a little bit fuller sound, there's a little more bass in there, and I think it just has more range than the DJI Action. This one sounds a little bit flat, and you actually have to even raise up the gain a little bit on it in post to get it up to the same level as the GoPro. So starting off, I think the GoPro gets a win for the audio. Next up, we're going to talk about the color between these two. And for me, it's the DJI Action. The colors just seem a little bit warmer, a little bit truer to life, where the GoPro has a little bit more saturation in the skin, which kind of makes it look a little fake or a little animated. And in the shadows, there's a lot of blue tones with the GoPro, which I don't really like, and I usually end up editing that anyway. So if I don't have to do that and I can get it straight in camera, I'm gonna have to go with the DJI Action for the color. Next up is the auto exposure, and this is where I was turning it around into the garage from going from a bright environment into a darker environment. And for me, they are pretty similar. I think the GoPro gets there a little bit quicker, but in all honesty, in most of the cases, it overexposes. Like it ends up going past the proper exposure and then has to come back down, where the DJI Action is a little bit slower to get there, but it doesn't have to do that correction where it overexposes and then comes back down. So for this one, I think I'd also go with the DJI Action. Following up with that, we're going to look at the low light performance. Now I set up both of these cameras, went through 100 all the way up to 3200 ISO. And for the first, 4 or 5 ISOs, I think the GoPro does have an edge. It has a softer overall image and you don't see that grain as much. Once you start getting into like the 1600 ISOs, I think that's where the DJI Action starts to take an advantage with keeping a lot of detail, where the GoPro just starts to get really soft. And then up to 3200 ISO, the GoPro is incredibly soft. I wouldn't use that at all, but I think you could still get away with it with the DJI Action, having some detail left in the image. Next up, we're going to take a look at the stabilization, and for this one, I think both of them do an amazing job. The GoPro Hero 7 with the Hypersmooth and the DJI Action with their Rocksteady both do an incredible job at reducing any sort of vibration or shake that would be introduced into the camera, as you can see when I'm riding on the four-wheeler. The one thing I did like about the GoPro for this setup though, is it does have a little bit wider field of view. When you put on the Rocksteady, it crops it in 10% on the image. So the GoPro has a little bit bigger field of view. So especially if you're doing close-ups, it's nicer to have that wider angle. But with that wider angle comes a little bit more distortion on the edges, which was introduced on the GoPro, and it's very, very linear on the DJI Action. So you kind of have to have that trade-off. After that, we tested the frame rates, and for this, the GoPro had a few more options in there, so I wasn't able to test some side-by-side with the DJI Action. But as far as the slow-mo footage, I think they both looked very comparable. I wouldn't give an edge to either one of these. I think they both had some really nice 240 frames a second as well as 4K 60. So for slow-mo, I think you're going to get the same with either of these cameras. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the resolution of the cameras. And I think when they're moving and you're doing some action stuff, moving around in the frame, they're both going to be pretty similar. They're both shooting 4K, so you have the same sort of pixel density. They're both a similar size sensor. Where the GoPro starts to take a lead with the resolution is with still subjects. I was shooting some just different textures, and the GoPro seemed to have a much higher resolution, even though the color was still a little bit off from what the DJI Action was, which I think is truer to life. But as far as sharpness, I think the GoPro definitely had an advantage with at least still images. When they're moving, they're both pretty comparable. And the last thing that I want to talk about both of these cameras is the touchscreen and the back LCD displays, as well as the front LCD displays on these cameras. So one thing that's always bugged me about GoPro, I've been a GoPro user since I think Hero 3 and basically used every model since then, is the touchscreen just never felt super responsive. It's a pretty low resolution display, so you're not getting good image on it, and it's also not super accurate for your touchscreen. So when you're swiping through menus, you end up clicking something else and you have to go back into the menu, you end up hitting the back button, or you click something that you don't want to, especially being on such a small LCD screen. Going over to the DJI Action was super intuitive. I think the menu layout on this camera is much better. It's faster to go into your manual settings and sort of adjust them as you need to, instead of trying to dive deeper into menus and just not having a responsive touchscreen to get through it quicker. If you want something that's responsive and a little bit easier to use, I would go with the DJI Action over the GoPro Hero 7. The other thing is the front LCD displays. Now I know this is an older model, this is the Hero 7, and I'm sure when the Hero 8 comes out, it's gonna have the same front LCD display as the DJI Action, but this right now, being able to see yourself while you're shooting is just a huge game changer, especially if you're doing any sort of vlogging stuff. But as far as extra features, both of these cameras can do built-in time-lapse modes, they can do the slow motion like we looked at, they can do good 4K. So right now I think the best bang for the buck is going to be with the DJI Action, having that front LCD screen, having a high resolution and better interface on the back. It just makes the whole process so much more enjoyable than trying to mess around with the GoPro. We'll have to see when the GoPro Hero 8 comes out if they're going to redesign the menus and also add in that front LCD screen. We'll have to do another test when that comes out. But that's my comparison of the DJI Action versus the GoPro Hero 7. If you have any questions about either of these cameras, especially the DJI Action because that's the newer one, make sure to let me know in the comments down below. If you want to try this camera out for yourself and do your own tests, there's going to be links in the description. If you want to see more videos just like this, more comparisons with other action cameras or other cameras in general, make sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe for new videos every single week, and I'll see you in the next one.